My name is Clara. I am 34 years old and I just used a single piece of paper to destroy my toxic family. After 4 grueling years of fertility treatments, I stood in the private dining room of a Michelin-starred restaurant to tell my parents the impossible news. I was finally pregnant. My mother, Patricia, did not even put down her crystal wine glass. She looked at me, her lips curling into a practiced sneer. "Let us hope this one is smarter than you, Clara," she said. My younger sister Audrey let out a sharp, mocking laugh. My father William did not defend me. He just checked his gold watch and sighed loudly, asking if we could eat now because he had an early tea time tomorrow. I looked at my husband, Ian, who gave me a single firm nod. I simply stood up, pulled a sealed envelope from my designer bag, and began to read a clinical letter my obstetrician had written for me. By the 3rd sentence, the smugness completely melted off my sister's face. By the 5th sentence, my mother was weeping uncontrollably, her perfect socialite facade shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe because you are going to want to hear exactly how I dismantled their toxic empire, word by word, and legally erased them from my life forever. The destruction of my family's web of lies did not start at that dinner table. It started 3 days earlier in the sterile, fluorescent-lit office of my fertility clinic. But the groundwork for their cruelty had been laid decades ago. I work as a chief data analyst for a major tech firm in Chicago. I make a very comfortable living, a life Ian and I built entirely on our own. Yet, in the eyes of my parents, I was utterly worthless. My mother, Patricia, was a woman obsessed with appearances, high society, and the preservation of elite bloodlines. My father, William, was the heir to a massive generational fortune, commanding a trust fund worth upwards of $40 million. He was a passive man when it came to parenting, outsourcing all emotional labor and discipline to my mother, while he focused exclusively on expanding his wealth. And then there was Audrey, 31 years old, undeniably beautiful, and viciously manipulative. She was the golden child. While I spent my youth studying algorithms and data structures to earn my independence, Audrey spent hers perfecting the art of wrapping our parents around her finger. Whatever she did was celebrated. Whatever I did was either ignored or actively mocked. This toxic dynamic reached a boiling point over the past 2 years. Ian and I had been desperately trying to start a family. The physical and emotional toll of 4 failed IVF cycles had left me drained, bruised, and incredibly vulnerable. The hormone injections made me sick, and the constant negative test results broke my heart a little more each time. Did my family offer support? Absolutely not. Audrey had gotten pregnant effortlessly, marrying Jamal, a brilliant and genuinely kind African-American architect who quite frankly was entirely too good for her. From the moment Audrey announced her pregnancy, my mother weaponized it against me. Patricia would intentionally mail the invoices for Audrey's lavish over-the-top baby shower directly to my home address. She would attach bright pink sticky notes to the bills that read, "Since you do not have college funds to save for, you can cover the floral arrangements." She would call me during my workday just to casually drop remarks about my empty womb and how Audrey was fulfilling her duty to the family lineage while I was nothing but a biological dead end. I tolerated it because I thought that was just the hand I had been dealt. I kept the peace to protect my own sanity. I swallowed the insults. I paid the bills to avoid the dramatic fallout that would inevitably occur if I stood up for myself. I convinced myself that keeping my head down was the mature thing to do. But a person can only be pushed so far before their spine turns to steel. My career as a chief data analyst requires me to look at patterns to find anomalies and to draw logical conclusions from messy information. For years, I applied this skill to massive corporate databases, but I purposefully ignored the glaring anomalies in my own family. I ignored why my mother was so fiercely protective of Audrey. I ignored why my father seemed so disconnected from us both. I focused entirely on my career and my marriage to Ian. Ian was my sanctuary. A man who loved me fiercely and constantly reminded me of my worth when my family tried to tear it down. He held my hand through every agonizing clinic visit, wiping my tears when the ultrasound screen showed nothing but empty space. They had no idea I was quietly gathering strength to completely destroy their fake kingdom and rebuild my peace on my own terms. One calculated move at a time without them ever realizing it. The first open battle in this silent war happened exactly 1 week before that fateful dinner. Audrey marched into my downtown office unannounced. She did not come to ask about my recent treatments or offer any sympathy. Instead, she sat in my guest chair casually inspecting her expensive manicure and demanded that Ian and I sign over the deed to our newly purchased 5-bedroom suburban home. She claimed my body was broken and the space belonged to her perfect son, the true heir. That single conversation lit the match that would burn everything to the ground, exposing a 31-year-old secret that my mother was desperate to keep buried deep beneath her lies and endless vanity. And I already knew it. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the glass door to my corner office swung open without so much as a polite knock. I was deep in a complex predictive model for our quarterly earnings, my mind running on caffeine and barely 4 hours of sleep. Audrey strolled in holding a designer coffee cup dressed in a pristine white cashmere sweater that cost more than my first car. She did not ask if I was busy. She simply dropped her leather handbag onto my mahogany desk, scattering my carefully organized files. "You look exhausted, Clara," she announced, taking a seat uninvited. "Those hormone injections are really doing a number on your skin. You should probably just give up before you ruin your face completely." I stared at her, biting the inside of my cheek to keep my composure. "Audrey, I have a board presentation in 20 minutes. What do you want?" She took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. "Jamal and I were talking. Our downtown condo is getting way too cramped. Jamal Jr. is growing fast, and he needs a proper backyard, a good neighborhood with the right school district." "Okay," I replied cautiously. "Are you asking for a real estate agent recommendation? Ian knows a few good brokers." Audrey laughed, that same sharp, grating sound that always preceded her worst demands. "Do not be dense, Clara. I am talking about your house. The 5-bedroom colonial you and Ian just closed on in the suburbs. It is completely wasted on the two of you." I froze, my fingers hovering over my keyboard. I genuinely thought I had misheard her. Ian and I had saved for 7 years for that house. We skipped vacations, worked 80-hour weeks, and invested every bonus into our savings account to afford the down payment. It was our sanctuary, the place we dreamed of raising our future children. "You want us to sell you our house?" I asked, struggling to process her audacity. "Sell." Audrey wrinkled her perfect nose as if the word offended her. "No. I want you to transfer the deed to me. Think of it as an early inheritance gift for your nephew. You can cover the remaining mortgage. Obviously, you and Ian make plenty of money, and you can easily downsize to a practical 2-bedroom condo." The sheer delusion of her demand left me speechless. She was sitting in my office demanding I hand over a multi-million-dollar asset that I had bled for simply because she wanted it, when I did not immediately respond. She leaned forward, dropping her voice into a tone of mock sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Look, Clara, let us be completely honest here. Your uterus is basically a hostile environment. You have tried 4 times and your body just keeps failing. You are a biological dead end. It is tragic, really. But it is the truth. Why hold on to 5 empty bedrooms when you are never going to fill them?" The words hostile environment and biological dead end hit me like physical blows to the chest. The psychological damage was instantaneous. She knew exactly where to twist the knife. She knew how many nights I had spent sobbing on the bathroom floor after another negative test. She knew the physical agony of the treatments, and she was weaponizing my deepest trauma to steal my home. Jamal Jr. is the true future of this family. Audrey continued, completely unfazed by the tears stinging my eyes. He is the one who will carry on the lineage. He deserves that house. Mom already agreed with me. She said there is absolutely no point in you hoarding space when you cannot even perform the basic function of a woman. It is just selfish. Clara. The mention of our mother was the tipping point. They had discussed this. They had sat together, dissected my medical trauma, and concluded that my infertility meant I no longer deserved the fruits of my own labor. I was no longer a person to them. I was merely a resource to be plundered for the benefit of the golden child. A cold, hard fury began to build in my stomach, replacing the initial shock and pain. I stood up slowly. I did not yell. I did not cry. I looked down at my sister, seeing her not as family, but as a parasite. "Get out," I said, my voice dangerously low. Audrey blinked, surprised by my tone. "Excuse me. I am trying to have a logical family discussion with you." "Get out of my office," I repeated, stepping around the desk. "You are not getting my house. You are not getting a single cent of my money. And if you ever speak about my body or my marriage again, I will have security physically drag you out of this building." Audrey stood up indignantly, snatching her handbag from my desk. "You are being completely unreasonable and bitter. Just because you are broken does not mean you have to punish your nephew." Mom was right. You are incredibly selfish. Security is on speed dial. Audrey, 30 seconds. She glared at me, turning on her designer heel. "You will regret this." Clara, Mom is going to be furious. She slammed the glass door behind her, leaving me alone in the sudden ringing silence of my office. I sank back into my chair, my hands shaking violently. I pressed my palms against my eyes, fighting back the sob that was tearing at my throat. Biological dead end. The words echoed in my mind. A toxic loop of self-doubt and misery. They knew exactly how to break me down, how to make me feel less than human. I called Ian the second my board presentation was over. He listened quietly as I recounted the entire conversation, his silence on the other end of the phone speaking volumes about his simmering rage. Jamal is an honorable, hard-working architect, a genuinely good man who loved his child and his wife. I knew for a fact Jamal had absolutely no idea his wife was shaking down her sister for real estate. Audrey was operating entirely on the entitlement our mother had fed her since birth. "I am coming to pick you up," Ian said, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "We are going home to our home, the one we bought." That evening, walking through the spacious, empty rooms of our beautiful suburban home, the silence felt heavier than usual. Audrey's words had infected the space. I looked at the room we had painted a soft, neutral yellow, the room that was supposed to be a nursery. It stood empty, a physical manifestation of my perceived failures. Ian wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Do not let her inside your head. Clara. She is a vulture. She wants what you have because she lacks the discipline to earn it herself." "But what if she is right?" I whispered, the psychological damage taking root. "What if I am a dead end? What if we never fill these rooms?" Ian turned me around, forcing me to look into his steady, unwavering eyes. "You are my family. This house is our home. Whether it is just the two of us or a dozen kids, this belongs to us. Audrey is poison, and we are going to cut the poison out." I nodded, drawing strength from his absolute certainty. But the interaction had fundamentally changed something within me. The blind loyalty I had harbored for my family. The desperate lingering hope that if I just worked hard enough, they would eventually love me. Evaporated completely. It was replaced by a sharp, calculating clarity. Audrey and Patricia did not view me as a daughter or a sister. They viewed me as a bank account they could withdraw from at will, and when I refused their withdrawal, they tried to break my spirit to force compliance. They felt completely untouchable, protected by the bubble of my father's immense wealth and my mother's ruthless social maneuvering. But as a chief data analyst, I knew that no system was perfectly secure. Every fortress has a weak point. Every flawless facade has a structural flaw waiting to be exploited. Audrey's brazen demand for my home was not just an insult. It was a tactical error. It revealed the depth of their greed and the absolute lack of boundaries they possessed. It showed me exactly how they operated. If they were willing to steal my house using my infertility as a weapon, what else were they capable of? What other lines had they crossed in their pursuit of wealth and status? I wiped my tears and looked at the empty nursery one last time. I was done being the victim of their entitlement. I was done paying for their lavish lifestyles while swallowing their abuse. The psychological damage was done. Yes, but it had forged a weapon out of my grief. They wanted to play a game of ruthless acquisition and emotional warfare. They had no idea they had just invited a master strategist to the board. To understand the sudden, brazen escalation from my family, you have to understand the math. As a data analyst, I know that sudden spikes in aggressive behavior rarely happen without an underlying catalyst. In my family, that catalyst was a specific calendar date. My father, William, was about to turn 65. That birthday, which was exactly 5 weeks away, was not just a milestone for retirement. It was the activation date for a generational financial mechanism known as the William Family Trust. We are not talking about a modest savings account or a small portfolio of stocks. We are talking about $40 million in diversified assets, commercial real estate holdings, and liquid capital. The trust had been established by my great-grandfather with a notoriously ironclad archaic stipulation. The inheritance was strictly limited to direct biological bloodline heirs, not adopted children, not spouses, not stepchildren, and certainly not anyone married into the family. Only verified DNA descendants of the William lineage could access the principal. Audrey had always operated under the assumption that she would eventually control the lion's share of our family wealth because she played the beautiful, perfect daughter. But the trust did not care about who smiled brightest at country club dinners or who gave our mother the most compliments. It divided the assets equally among the verified bloodline. Legally, I was entitled to 50% of that $40 million. My sister and my mother simply could not stomach the idea of me receiving $20 million. They viewed my potential wealth as an absolute affront to their carefully curated hierarchy. That is when my mother, Patricia, launched a relentless, highly coordinated campaign of harassment. It started the very next morning after I threw Audrey out of my downtown office. My personal cell phone began ringing at 7 in the morning and did not stop. When I finally blocked her number to protect my peace, she bypassed my personal devices and started flooding my professional corporate email inbox. She marked every single message as urgent, knowing my executive assistants would have to screen them. Patricia was not just contacting me to yell about disrespecting Audrey. She was reaching out with a very specific, highly aggressive legal demand. She wanted me to sign a formal notarized waiver completely forfeiting my right to the William Family Trust. She went so far as to have her personal wealth management attorneys draft the heavy legal document, and she sent it to my house via a certified courier who banged on my front door at dinner time. The voicemails she left on my home answering machine were a masterclass in psychological cruelty. She argued that my infertility made me fundamentally unworthy of the family lineage. I remember standing in my kitchen one evening, holding a spatula, while her recorded voice echoed through the room. "Clara, you need to be realistic about your unfortunate situation." Her voice sneered through the speaker. "You are a biological dead end. You cannot produce heirs. The trust was designed to secure the future of this family. and you clearly have no future to offer us. It is practically a moral obligation for you to step aside and let Jamal Jr. inherit your share. Do not be a selfish, barren woman. Sign the papers and stop embarrassing yourself. Ian had grabbed the answering machine and ripped the power cord right out of the wall. His face flushed with pure, unadulterated fury. He wanted to drive straight over to their gated estate and confront them both. I had to physically stand in front of the door to stop him. My grief over my failed IVF cycles was profound, and the words cut me to the bone. But the sheer volume and intensity of Patricia's attacks were starting to trigger my professional instincts. Something in the data simply did not align. Patricia had always been incredibly greedy, and she had always favored Audrey over me. But this level of manic desperation was entirely new. She was acting frantic. The legal waiver she sent was drafted with obvious panic, full of extreme clauses demanding my immediate signature within 48 hours. If I was simply the less favored daughter. Why go to such extreme, legally binding lengths to force me out right now? The trust automatically divided the assets between Audrey and me upon our father's birthday. There was absolutely no legal requirement for me to forfeit anything just because I did not currently have children. The money would sit in an account with my name on it. Completely secure. My data analyst brain took over, pushing the emotional trauma aside. I sat at my dining room table, staring at the thick legal document she had sent. People who are confident in their position do not panic. People who hold the winning hand do not try to force their opponents to fold before the cards are even revealed. Patricia was terrified of something. She was using my painful infertility journey as a cruel, emotional smoke-o-casey screen. A manipulation tactic designed to break my confidence so I would sign away my rights blindly and quickly. I realized her desperation was hiding something much darker than simple favoritism. She was not just trying to secure more money to fund Audrey's lavish lifestyle. She was trying to prevent a legal and financial audit that would inevitably occur when the trust activated in 5 weeks. When $40 million changes hands, the estate lawyers leave no stone unturned. They would have to verify everything. More importantly, they would have to verify everyone. There was a massive variable in this financial equation that my mother was desperately trying to conceal, and she needed me out of the picture before the legal audit began. I did not sign the waiver. Instead, I locked it in my safe. Realizing my family's cruelty had just handed me the first major clue to their ultimate undoing. I knew that patience was my greatest weapon. The storm was coming and I was going to control it. 2 days after I locked the trust waiver in my safe. The storm escalated from aggressive harassment to outright extortion. It arrived in the form of a heavy envelope delivered directly to my corporate office. I assumed it was another legal threat regarding my father's trust fund. Instead, I pulled out a massive itemized invoice from an exclusive luxury catering company in downtown Chicago. The total amount due was $35,000. It was the final catering bill for Audrey's extravagant baby shower, an event that had taken place nearly a month ago. At the bottom of the invoice, my mother had attached a neon pink sticky note. The handwriting was sharp and demanding. It read, "Since you are refusing to do the right thing regarding the trust, the absolute least you can do is pay for your nephew's celebration. Wire the funds by Friday." I stared at the piece of paper, my analytical mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of the demand. $35,000 for a single afternoon of caviar, imported champagne, and towering displays of out-of-sea flowers. They had thrown a party that cost more than some people make in a year. And they expected me to blindly foot the bill as compensation for my barrenness. I did not even attend the baby shower. I had been recovering from my 4th failed embryo transfer that weekend, bleeding and sobbing in my own bed while they celebrated without me. I picked up my office phone and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the first ring, her tone dripping with smug satisfaction, clearly expecting me to yield. "I am not paying this invoice." Patricia, I stated, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Do not ever send your bills to my workplace again. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy, followed by a sharp, condescending laugh. Clara, do not be difficult. You and Ian have plenty of disposable income. You are not spending it on a family of your own, so you are going to support your sister. It is your duty. You owe us this much for the embarrassment you are causing by clinging to a trust fund you have no right to touch. I owe you absolutely nothing, I replied, my grip tightening on the receiver. You and Audrey can figure out how to pay for your own lavish parties. I am done functioning as your personal bank account. Her voice dropped its fake sweetness, turning into a low, venomous hiss. Listen to me very carefully. Clara, you are going to pay that invoice today. If you do not wire that $35,000 by 5 o'clock, I will have a conversation with your father about Ian's little consulting firm. My breath caught in my throat. Ian ran an independent logistics consulting firm. It was highly successful, but it relied heavily on contracts with large legacy corporations in the Midwest. Corporations where my father, William, sat on the board of directors. William has a lot of friends in this city, my mother continued, sensing my hesitation and mistaking it for fear. It would be an absolute tragedy if Ian suddenly found his contracts canned. One phone call from your father, just a quiet word in the right ear about Ian being unreliable or difficult to work with, and his entire client roster would evaporate. We can bankrupt your husband by next week. Pay the bill. Clara, do not force me to ruin him just because you are being a bitter, infertile brat. She hung up the phone, leaving a dial tone ringing in my ear. I set the receiver down slowly. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a profound, terrifying clarity. The extortion was laid bare. This was no longer just about toxic family dynamics or cruel favoritism. My mother was actively threatening to destroy my husband's livelihood to fund her golden child's lifestyle. That was the exact breaking point. It was the moment the final lingering shred of daughterly affection I held for my family completely disintegrated. The illusion was shattered. I realized with absolute certainty that they viewed me solely as a financial resource. I was not a human being to them. I was a machine they could kick and abuse until money fell out. And when the machine stopped dispensing cash, they were perfectly willing to destroy it. I left work early and drove straight home. When I walked through the front door, Ian was in the kitchen cooking dinner. He took one look at my pale face and immediately turned off the stove, pulling me into his arms. I collapsed against his chest, the tears I had been fighting all afternoon finally breaking free. I told him everything. I told him about the $35,000 catering bill. I told him about the cruel sticky note, and trembling with guilt, I told him about my mother's threat to use my father's corporate connections to blacklist his consulting firm and destroy his career. I expected him to panic. I expected him to worry about his business. Instead, Ian simply tightened his embrace, his hand gently stroking my hair. He did not care about the money. He did not care about William's corporate influence. He only cared about the woman shaking in his arms. Let them try, Ian whispered fiercely, his voice a steady anchor in my storm. I built my business from the ground up. Clara, my clients stay with me because I deliver results, not because I kiss your father's ring. If William wants to make phone calls, let him. We have enough savings to weather any storm they throw at us. I am not afraid of them. He pulled back, wiping a tear from my cheek. We will get your medical results from Dr. Eris Thorne next week. Then we are cutting them off forever. We sever the cord entirely. I nodded ready. The following Thursday, Ian and I walked through the sliding glass doors of the fertility clinic for what we had silently agreed would be our final appointment. The extortion attempt had hardened my resolve, but it had not erased the deep anxiety in my stomach. The sterile smell of the waiting room, the soft instrumental music playing from hidden speakers, and the nervous shifting of other couples all felt suffocating. We were here to review the results of my latest blood work and discuss the next steps after our fourth failed embryo transfer. At least, that was what I believed when we checked in at the front desk. We sat in the familiar plush chairs of examination room 3, Ian holding my hand so tightly his knuckles were white. When Dr. Eris Thorne walked in, his demeanor immediately struck me as different. He was a brilliant man in his 50s, usually maintaining a strictly clinical, compassionate but reserved posture. Today, he was holding a thick manila folder and looking at us with an intense expression. He did not sit behind his large mahogany desk as he normally did. Instead, he pulled up a rolling stool right in front of us, closing the physical distance in the room. "Clara Ian," he started, his voice steady. "We ran your latest human chorionic gonadotropin levels twice because I wanted to be absolutely certain before I brought you in here today." I braced myself for the finality of it. I prepared for the confirmation that my body had failed again, that the hostile environment my sister had cry-mocked was my permanent reality. I squeezed Ian's hand, locking my jaw and preparing to hear the words that would close this traumatic chapter of our lives forever. "Your levels are not just elevated," Dr. Thorne said, a slow, genuine smile breaking across his face. "They are exceptionally high. Clara, against all statistical odds for your specific profile. You are pregnant." The room seemed to violently tilt. The ambient hum of the clinic equipment faded into absolute silence. I stared at him, my analytical brain completely refusing to process the data. Pregnant. After 4 agonizing years of heartbreak, countless expensive injections, and rivers of tears on bathroom floors. The word felt like a foreign language. Ian let out a sound that was half gasp and half laugh, pulling me into a crushing embrace. I buried my face in his shoulder, the shock finally giving way to uncontrollable tears of pure joy. But Dr. Thorne was not finished. He gestured toward the ultrasound machine humming quietly in the corner of the room. "Let us take a look. Shall we? I want to confirm visually what the numbers are suggesting." I lay back on the examination table, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The cold gel on my stomach grounded me in reality. Dr. Thorne moved the wand carefully over my abdomen, his eyes fixed intensely on the monitor. Seconds stretched into hours. Ian stood beside my head, his warm hand resting on my forehead, neither of us daring to breathe or break the spell. "There is the first gestational sac." "Doctor," Thorne announced, pointing to a small, dark circle on the glowing screen. "And right there, measuring perfectly on track, is a strong heartbeat." I sobbed aloud, the sound tearing from my throat without any restraint. A heartbeat. A real living, rapid heartbeat inside me. And Dr. Thorne continued, his voice thick with quiet triumph as he moved the wand slightly to the left. "Here is the second one also with a strong, perfectly healthy heartbeat. Clara, you are pregnant with twins." Twins! The sheer magnitude of the miracle washed over us, completely overwhelming my senses. Everything my mother and sister had said about me being a biological dead end, all the cruel taunts and financial blackmail. It all evaporated in the glorious presence of those 2 tiny pulses on the monitor. We had won the hardest battle of our lives. We were going to be parents. Ian pressed his forehead against mine, his own tears falling freely onto my cheeks, whispering over and over how much he loved me. For 3 beautiful minutes. The world was absolutely perfect. Then Dr. Thorne turned off the monitor and handed me a paper towel to wipe off the gel. The warm, congratulatory smile faded entirely from his face, replaced by a grave, intensely serious expression. He waited patiently for me to sit up and adjust my clothes before gesturing for us to return to the chairs. The sudden shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken weight that made my newly found joy falter instantly. Before we can fully celebrate, we need to have a very difficult conversation, Dr. Thorne said, opening the thick manila folder he had brought in. The hidden shadow over this miracle needs to be addressed immediately to ensure we protect these babies. Ian instantly went on the defensive, wrapping his arm protectively around my shoulders. Is something wrong with the twins? Are they in danger? The twins are currently healthy, Dr. Thorne reassured him quickly, raising a hand to plate my husband. But this pregnancy is exceptionally high risk, and we need to understand exactly why. Over the last month, I ran a deep dive comprehensive genetic panel on the tissue from your previous losses. Clara, I wanted to understand why your embryos were failing to implant or miscarrying so early in the first trimester. I was not satisfied with the standard unexplained infertility diagnosis. He pulled out a thick stack of laboratory reports filled with complex genetic sequencing charts and highlighted markers. I leaned forward, my data analyst mind, snapping back to attention, craving the hard facts hidden in the numbers. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Clara, Dr. Thorne said, looking directly into my eyes with profound empathy. Your fertility issues. The 4 agonizing years of miscarriages and failed IVF cycles. They were not a failure on your part. Your body is not broken. Your uterus is not a hostile environment. You did absolutely nothing wrong. The validation hit me harder than I anticipated. A heavy, toxic burden I had carried for years. A burden actively magnified by my family's relentless psychological abuse began to lift off my chest. If I did not do anything wrong, then what exactly happened? I asked, my voice barely a whisper in the quiet room. Your struggles are the result of a very specific, rare genetic anomaly. Doctor, Thorne explained, tapping his silver pen against the highlighted data on the top page. It explains every single loss you have experienced, and it changes everything about how we must manage this pregnancy moving forward. The condition is known as a balanced translocation, Doctor, Thorne explained, turning the genetic report toward us so we could see the complex chromosomal mapping. In simple terms, 2 of your chromosomes broke off and swapped places with each other. For your own personal health. This means nothing. You have all the correct genetic information required to live a perfectly normal life. Your data is just arranged in a slightly unusual sequence. You have suffered no adverse health effects because no genetic material was actually lost or added during the swap. I stared at the color-coded chart, my analytical brain rapidly decoding the visual representation of my own DNA. If the sequence is just rearranged but fully intact, I asked, why did my body reject 4 perfectly viable embryos? Why did I spend 4 years unable to sustain a pregnancy? Because reproduction relies on the precise splitting and combining of those chromosomes. Dr. Thorne answered gently, when your body attempts to create an egg, the chromosomes divide. Because yours are translocated, there is a statistically massive probability that the resulting egg will receive an unbalanced set of chromosomes. It will either have too much genetic material or too little. When that unbalanced egg meets a sperm, the resulting embryo is genetically unviable. Ian squeezed my hand. So every time we tried, Ian murmured, the realization hitting him hard. We were basically playing a game of biological roulette with loaded dice. The embryos were failing before they even had a chance to grow. Exactly, Dr. Thorne confirmed with a solemn nod. The odds of producing a balanced embryo and carrying it past the first trimester were slim. That is why your previous pregnancies ended in early miscarriages. Your uterus is perfectly healthy. Clara, it was simply doing its biological job by resolving unviable pregnancies. The fact that you are currently pregnant with 2 healthy twins is a profound statistical anomaly. It is by every medical definition a miracle. I let out a shaky breath, processing the immense weight of his words. For years, I had internalized the toxic narrative my mother and sister had pushed onto me. They had convinced me I was a failure, a broken woman who could not perform a basic biological function. They had used my trauma to justify their cruelty, claiming I was unworthy of my inheritance. But the data sitting on the desk told a completely different story. I was not broken. I was just dealing with a complex genetic equation that had finally balanced itself out. But Dr. Thorne was not finished. He leaned back on his stool, his expression growing even more serious. There is another critical aspect to a balanced translocation that we must discuss. He continued. This specific genetic anomaly is very rarely a spontaneous mutation. In the vast majority of cases, it is hereditary. It is passed down directly from a parent to a child. I frowned, trying to connect the dots. Hereditary. But neither of my parents have ever mentioned struggling with fertility. My mother had Audrey and me without any documented issues. If one of them had this translocation, wouldn't they have experienced the same miscarriages I did? Not necessarily. Dr. Thorne explained. Statistical probability means they could have simply gotten lucky on the genetic roulette wheel. However, I did not just stop at identifying the translocation. I ran an exhaustive comparative analysis of the specific chromosomal breakage points. This genetic marker is incredibly distinct. It is highly identifiable and functions essentially like a biological fingerprint. He pulled a secondary document from the folder, a crisp sheet of paper bearing the official seal of the laboratory. Based on the specific nature of the chromosomal swap, we can trace the exact lineage of the mutation, he stated, pushing the paper toward me. Clara, this specific marker was undeniably passed down through your paternal line. You inherited this balanced translocation directly from your father, William. The air in the examination room suddenly felt incredibly thin. I stared at the laboratory seal, my mind racing as the massive implications of that single sentence crashed over me. Are you absolutely certain? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Is there no margin for error in this data, Doctor? Thorne shook his head firmly. There is zero margin for error. Genetic science is absolute. This specific translocation is your father's exact biological signature etched permanently into your DNA. You carry William's undeniable ironclad genetic marker. Legally and biologically, there is absolutely no questioning your direct lineage. My mind snapped back to the harassment I had been enduring. Patricia's frantic calls, Audrey's demand for my house, the legal waiver demanding I forfeit my rights to the $40 million William family trust. The trust carried a strict stipulation explicitly stating that the inheritance was limited exclusively to direct biological bloodline heirs. My mother had been tormenting me, calling me a biological dead end, trying to force me to sign away my birthright. But sitting right in front of me was the undeniable medical proof that I was the exact opposite of a dead end. I was the absolute verified continuation of William's genetic code. I carried his rare mutation. I possessed the very biological signature required to inherit the trust. Ian looked at me, his eyes widening. He knew about Patricia's desperate extortion attempts. He saw the cold clarity dawn on my face. If I have this highly specific genetic marker from my father, I said slowly, measuring every syllable, then anyone else who shares his direct bloodline has a 50% chance of carrying the exact same marker. Yes, Dr. Thorne agreed. It is a dominant genetic footprint. The puzzle pieces snapped into place, forming a picture so sinister it made my blood run cold. My mother was trying to eliminate me before anyone started looking too closely at our family genetics. I finally held the key. Dr. Thorne broke through the heavy silence, pulling my focus back to the immediate medical reality of my high-risk pregnancy. Knowing the origin of the anomaly is a crucial first step. Clara, he said, leaning forward, but knowing it exists is not enough to guarantee the safety of the twins. To ensure these babies survive to full term, I need to map the exact chromosomal breakpoints of the translocation with absolute precision. I nodded, pulling a notebook from my bag. Tell me what you need me to do. I need your father's raw genetic data. Dr. Thorne explained. If I can analyze William's DNA, I can map the precise microscopic locations where the chromosomes swapped. Armed with that blueprint, I can tailor your prenatal care completely. We can run targeted non-invasive testing and monitor the twins' genetic expression. Without his data, we are navigating this high-risk pregnancy in the dark. With it, we can preemptively treat complications before they threaten the babies. Ian squeezed my shoulder. So, we just need his medical records or a blood test. Either his verified genetic medical records from a hospital database or a simple fresh cheek swab. Dr. Thorne confirmed. It is a painless 5-minute procedure, but I need it as soon as possible. Time is of the essence when managing a high-risk twin pregnancy. We left the clinic 30 minutes later, walking out into the brisk Chicago air. My hands were wrapped securely around my abdomen. I was carrying two miracles, but my mind was already calculating the complex logistics of acquiring my father's DNA. Just call William directly, Ian suggested as he unlocked the car doors. Tell him his grandchildren need a cheek swab to survive. Even a man as disconnected as your father will not refuse a simple swab to save 2 lives. I shook my head, sliding into the passenger seat. It is never that simple with my family. Patricia acts as an impenetrable firewall around him. She manages his personal cell phone and coordinates his entire schedule under the guise of being a devoted wife. If I try to bypass her and contact him directly, she will find out immediately and frame it as me causing workplace drama. I have to go through her. When we arrived back at our house, I sat at my kitchen island and took a deep breath. I dialed my mother's cell phone number. She answered on the second ring, her tone clipped and impatient. Clara, I am selecting floral arrangements for a charity gala. This had better be important. Have you finally decided to stop being stubborn and sign the trust waiver? I ignored the bait, keeping my voice professional. Patricia, I am calling because I just left my obstetrician. I am pregnant with twins. The pregnancy is extremely high risk due to a rare genetic condition I inherited directly from William. My doctor needs his raw genetic medical records or a simple cheek swab to map the anomaly and ensure my babies survive. I expected a pause. I expected perhaps a sliver of maternal shock at the news of twins, or maybe a mild inquiry about the genetic condition. I expected a standard dismissive comment about my health. I did not expect pure, unadulterated panic. What genetic condition? Patricia demanded, her voice suddenly shrill, completely abandoning her usual composed socialite persona. What exactly did this doctor tell you? You have no right to go digging into family medical histories without my permission. It is a chromosomal translocation, I explained, matching her panic with cold clinical facts. It is the reason my previous IVF cycles failed. It is highly identifiable. And it came exclusively from William's DNA. My doctor needs his sample immediately to tailor my prenatal care. It is a matter of life and death for the twins. Absolutely not. Patricia snapped her breathing audibly, quickening over the receiver. I forbid it. I absolutely forbid you from dragging your father into this frivolous medical nonsense. He is a very busy man. Clara, he is preparing for his 65th birthday. The last thing he needs is his dramatic daughter demanding DNA tests for some imaginary clinic protocol. Patricia, this is not a request. I pushed back, dropping the polite facade. My doctor requires his cheek swab. It takes 5 minutes. If you will not facilitate it, I will drive to his country club tomorrow morning and hand him the swab myself. Do not you dare go near him. She screamed. The volume of her voice made me pull the phone away from my ear. You will do no such thing. You will not bother him at the club, and you will not approach him at his office. You are trying to manufacture a crisis just to get his attention because you are jealous of Audrey. Her reaction was entirely irrational. She was not acting like an annoyed mother protecting her husband's schedule. She was acting like a cornered animal. Her desperation was practically vibrating through the phone line. Fine, I said smoothly, laying the trap. Then how do you suggest we get the raw genetic data my doctor requires? I will handle it, Patricia said rapidly, her words tripping over each other in her haste. I will take the cheek swab from him myself tonight. I will personally deliver the sealed sample to your clinic tomorrow afternoon. Do you understand me? You stay away from William. I will handle the medical swab. She hung up before I could say another word. I lowered the phone. My analyst brain was processing the sheer terror in my mother's voice. Asking a father for a harmless cheek swab to save his grandchildren should be a non-issue. The fact that she was willing to scream at me and aggressively gatekeep a simple cotton swab confirmed my darkest suspicions. Patricia was terrified of William's DNA entering a medical laboratory, and I was going to let her dig her own grave. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of hypervigilance. My phone glued to my hand. I had cast the line, and now I just had to wait and see how violently my mother would strike at the bait. The wait was excruciating. Ian paced the length of our living room, his jaw clenched, ready to intervene if Patricia showed up at our door. But she didn't. Instead, the confirmation of her deception arrived via a frantic phone call from Dr. Thorne. It was exactly 2 days later, a Thursday afternoon. The clinic caller ID flashed on my screen, and I answered immediately, bracing myself for the medical update. Clara. Dr. Thorne's voice was unusually strained, lacking his typical measured calm. I need you to come into the clinic right now. Is Ian with you? My heart hammered against my ribs. Yes, he's here. What's wrong? Is it the twins? The twins are fine, he assured me quickly, the relief washing over me only momentary. It's the DNA sample your mother dropped off this morning. I expedited the sequencing because of the high-risk nature of your pregnancy. Clara, we have a massive problem. We were in his office 20 minutes later. Doctor, Thorne didn't even bother sitting down. He was pacing behind his desk holding a single sheet of paper. Your mother hand delivered a sealed buccal swab kit at 9 o'clock this morning. He began his professional demeanor, struggling against evident shock. She was very insistent that it be processed immediately, and that she be the primary contact for the results. She even tried to have you removed from the HIPAA authorization forms for this specific test. Ian let out a sharp breath. She tried to cut Clara out of her own medical loop. She tried, but she failed. Dr. Thorne confirmed sliding the paper across the desk. I ran the sequencing on the sample she provided, cross-referencing it with your genetic profile to map the translocation. I picked up the paper. My eyes scanned the complex data, searching for the anomaly. I didn't need to be a geneticist to understand the bold red summary at the bottom of the page. It's a 0% match, I read aloud, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. Dr. Thorne stopped pacing and leaned heavily on his desk. It's not just a 0% match for the translocation, Clara. It is a 0% biological match entirely. The DNA on that swab belongs to a biological male, but it is unequivocally scientifically impossible for the man who provided that swab to be your biological father. The silence in the room was absolute. Ian stared at the paper, then at me, then back at the doctor. Are you saying she brought in a swab from a random stranger? That is exactly what I am saying, Dr. Thorne replied gravely. The implications hit me with the force of a physical blow. Patricia hadn't just refused to cooperate. She had committed blatant, desperate medical fraud. She had gone out of her way to acquire a DNA sample from an unrelated male, sealed it in a sterile kit, and lied to a medical professional, all while knowing the survival of her unborn grandchildren depended on the results. Why? Ian asked, voicing the question echoing in my mind. Why go to such extreme criminal lengths just to avoid asking her husband for a cheek swab because she's terrified? I answered the realization crystallizing into cold, hard certainty. I looked at the fraudulent DNA report, my analytical mind connecting the data points with terrifying speed. Patricia wasn't just a vain, cruel woman who favored one daughter over the other. She was a woman guarding a secret so massive, so destructive that she was willing to risk the lives of my twins to keep it hidden. Think about the timeline I said addressing Ian and Dr. Thorne. She panicked the second I mentioned a genetic test involving William. She forbade me from speaking to him. She demanded to handle it herself. And then she submits a fake sample. Why? Because she knows that if William's actual DNA enters a laboratory, something else will be discovered. Something she has spent her entire life trying to conceal. The William family trust. Ian murmured, the realization dawning on him. The $40 million. The strict stipulation that it only goes to direct biological bloodline heirs. Exactly. I knotted the pieces, locking together with sickening precision. She's been harassing me to sign a waiver claiming I'm unworthy because of my infertility. But that was a smokescreen. She needed me to forfeit my rights before the trust activates next month, before the estate lawyers mandate genetic verification for all heirs. She needed me out of the way because she knows the genetic audit will reveal the truth. Doctor. Thorne looked between us, his medical concern now tinged with deep alarm. What truth? Clara. I tapped the fraudulent report. I already have medical proof that I am William's biological daughter. I carry his specific, highly identifiable chromosomal translocation. There is no questioning my lineage. So, if she isn't trying to hide your paternity, Ian finished the thought, his eyes wide with shock. She's trying to hide Audrey's. The room spun. Audrey, the golden child, the perfect daughter who could do no wrong. The one Patricia relentlessly favored and protected. The one who had arrogantly demanded my house and mocked my struggles. Audrey isn't William's daughter. I whispered the words, hanging in the air like a death sentence for my family's entire existence. Patricia's desperation made perfect sense. Now, if William's DNA was tested, the results wouldn't just map my translocation. They would expose her 31-year-old affair. They would prove that Audrey, the beloved golden child, was not a bloodline heir and therefore completely ineligible for the $40 million trust. Patricia wasn't trying to steal my inheritance to give Audrey a larger share. She was trying to force me to forfeit my share so that Audrey would be the only remaining heir, ensuring the money stayed in her preferred child's hands before the lawyers could uncover the fraud. She was playing a frantic high-stakes game of distraction, using my trauma as leverage. Dr. Thorne, I said, my voice hardening into steel. I need you to document this fraudulent sample officially. I need a certified chain of custody report detailing exactly how and when Patricia submitted this fake swab. He nodded immediately. I will handle the documentation. But Clara, how are we going to map the translocation for the twins? We still need William's actual DNA to ensure a safe pregnancy. I stood up carefully, folding the fraudulent report and placing it in my bag. I will get you William's authentic medical records. I promised, but I am not going to ask Patricia for them. I am going to bypass her entirely. I walked out of the clinic with Ian, the fear and grief that had plagued me for years, entirely replaced by a cold, calculating determination. Patricia thought she was playing a game of emotional manipulation. She didn't realize she had just handed a chief data analyst the very anomaly needed to dismantle her entire fraudulent life. I needed William's verified genetic records, and I knew exactly who had the access, the integrity, and the unwitting proximity to get them for me. I needed to make a phone call to Audrey's husband, Jamal. My path to acquiring William's authentic genetic profile was complicated by Patricia's aggressive gatekeeping. I needed an entry point. Someone with legitimate access who possessed absolutely no loyalty to my mother's web of secrets. That person was Jamal. Jamal was a brilliant, highly sought-after commercial architect. He was a man of integrity, deeply devoted to his son, and unfortunately deeply blind to the manipulative nature of the family he had married into. Audrey had always portrayed herself to Jamal as the put-upon daughter, a narrative he accepted without question. because he was fundamentally a decent person who took people at their word. He knew my relationship with my family was strained. But Audrey had carefully cultivated a story where I was simply difficult and distant. I called Jamal the morning after Dr. Thorne dropped the bombshell about the fake DNA swab. I kept my tone casual, asking if he had time for a quick coffee near his firm's downtown office. He sounded surprised, but agreed readily, suggesting a quiet cafe just 2 blocks from his building. When I arrived, Jamal was already there reviewing blueprints on his tablet. He stood up to greet me, his warm, genuine smile, a stark contrast to the cold calculation currently running through my veins. "Clara, it is so good to see you," he said, pulling out a chair for me. "You look a bit tired. Is everything okay?" "I know you have been going through a lot with the clinic." I took a sip of the herbal tea I had ordered, letting a calculated vulnerability show on my face. "Jamal, I have some news. Ian and I are finally pregnant with twins." His face lit up with immediate, unfeigned joy. "Clara, that is incredible news. I am so happy for you both. Audrey is going to be thrilled for you." I forced a tight smile, suppressing the urge to laugh at the sheer absurdity of that statement. "Thank you, Jamal, but we are not telling the family just yet. It is very early, and unfortunately, it is an extremely high-risk pregnancy." His smile faltered, replaced instantly by concern. "I am so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Anything Ian needs help with?" This was the opening I needed. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to project an air of stressed confidentiality. "That is actually why I wanted to talk to you. My obstetrician, Dr. Thorne, is amazing, but he is incredibly thorough. Because of my history of miscarriages, he is requiring a comprehensive multi-generational family health history to anticipate any potential complications. He needs access to verified historical medical records, specifically from my father's side of the family, to check for any dormant genetic markers." Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Preventative care is crucial. So, you just need William to sign a release form." "That is the problem." I sighed, rubbing my temples. You know how Patricia is about William's schedule. She micromanages everything. When I mentioned needing medical records, she completely overreacted. She hates anything that implies physical weakness or illness in the family. She essentially forbade me from bothering him with it, claiming she would handle it herself by summarizing his history from memory. Jamal frowned, his brow furrowing. "But a doctor needs the actual data, not a summary. That seems like an unnecessary roadblock for her to throw up, especially given your situation." "Exactly," I agreed, letting the desperation bleed into my voice. Dr. Thorne was very clear that a verbal summary is useless. He needs the raw data from the hospital database. I am terrified that Patricia is going to stall or provide incomplete information just to avoid dealing with the paperwork, and my twins cannot afford any delays in their prenatal care. I paused, letting the silence hang between us, allowing him to process the perceived injustice of a mother obstructing her daughter's vital medical care. Jamal was a problem-solver by nature, an architect accustomed to bypassing structural obstacles. I just needed to guide him to the specific obstacle I wanted him to dismantle. "I know your firm handles a lot of commercial infrastructure," I said slowly, choosing my words with absolute precision. "I remember Audrey mentioning that you recently oversaw the massive digital and physical renovation for the Presidio Health Network." He nodded, confirming my target. "Yes, we finished the final phase last month. It was a massive overhaul of their secure server facilities and archival storage. Presidio Health Network was the exclusive, highly prestigious private hospital system where my father, my mother, and Audrey had received all their medical care for the past 3 decades. It was the fortress that held the data I desperately needed." I looked at him, my eyes wide and pleading. "Jamal, my father's entire medical history is archived in the Presidio system. I know you have top-level administrative clearance from managing the digital infrastructure upgrade. Is there any possible way you could securely request the release of William's archival genetic profile? Just the raw data file Dr. Thorne needs. I know it is a huge ask, but Patricia is blocking me, and I am terrified for my babies. Jamal hesitated, his professional ethics warring with his inherent desire to help family in crisis. Clara, you know, HIPAA. Regulations are incredibly strict, even with my administrative clearance. Accessing a patient file without a direct authorization code triggers security protocols. I know, I said quickly, reaching into my bag, but I am not asking you to hack the system. Jamal, I am asking you to use my legal status to bypass Patricia's gatekeeping. I slid a crisp notarized document across the cafe table. It was a general medical power of attorney drafted years ago when I first started my fertility treatments, granting me broad access to family medical history for reproductive purposes. It was a legally gray area in this specific context, but it looked incredibly official. I have legal authorization to request family records for genetic counseling, I explained. Tapping the document, I just need someone inside the system to process the request quickly and quietly without Patricia intercepting the physical mail or stalling the email chain. If you can initiate the secure transfer directly to Dr. Thorne's clinic portal using this authorization, it completely bypasses her. Jamal picked up the document, reviewing the notary seal. He looked at my pale, stressed face, then down at the authorization form. He was a good man, and I was leveraging his goodness to execute a ruthlessly calculated data heist. I can do it, he said finally, his voice low. I can submit the authorization through the encrypted back-end portal we designed. It will route the data package directly to your doctor's secure server within 24 hours. Patricia will never even see the request. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand, projecting overwhelming gratitude. Thank you, Jamal. You have no idea what this means for my babies. I knew exactly what it meant. It meant the countdown to the total annihilation of Patricia's fake kingdom had officially begun. I left the coffee shop with the crisp autumn air hitting my face, my pulse drumming a steady, victorious rhythm against my throat. Jamal had already packed up his tablet and headed back to his architectural firm, completely unaware that he was about to act as the ultimate Trojan horse. He believed he was performing a noble deed, rescuing his sister-in-law and his unborn nieces or nephews from the irrational bureaucratic red tape of a controlling mother. In reality, he was retrieving the exact ammunition required to obliterate the fraudulent foundation of his own wife's life. A fleeting wave of guilt washed over me for using him this way. Jamal was a good man, a dedicated father, and a brilliant professional. But Audrey had been using him for years, feeding him a sanitized, victimized version of her life. He deserved the truth just as much as I did. Returning to my corporate office, I locked the heavy glass door behind me and closed the privacy blinds. My role as a chief data analyst meant I had access to some of the most secure, heavily encrypted servers in Chicago. I cleared my dual monitors, closing out my quarterly predictive models and setting up a secure, isolated receiving channel. I sat in my ergonomic chair, staring at the blank screen, waiting for Jamal to initiate the digital handshake from the Presidio Health Network. The technical brilliance of this heist lay in its simplicity. Jamal's architecture firm had not just designed the sleek new physical wings of the Presidio Hospital. They had managed the comprehensive integration of their physical archival vaults into a brand new cloud-based digital infrastructure. During the handover phase of any massive technological upgrade, the lead architects and systems engineers retain high-level administrative backdoors for maintenance, stress testing, and emergency troubleshooting. Jamal had the digital skeleton key to the entire hospital network. He did not need a doctor's password. He did not need Patricia's signature. He just needed my notarized medical power of attorney to legally justify his presence in the system if the server logs were ever audited. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, A secure encrypted link appeared in my inbox. My breath hitched. The subject line was blank, but the sender address belonged to an automated routing protocol Jamal had set up. I clicked the link routing it through my company's heavy firewalls, and a command prompt box opened on my secondary monitor. My desk phone rang a second later. It was Jamal. "I am in the system. Clara." His voice came through the speaker low and focused. "I uploaded your power of attorney document to the compliance ledger. It cleared the front-end security checks. I am looking at the William Family Archival Directory now. It is massive. Decades of health records, blood work, surgical histories, and the raw genetic sequencing files you asked for. I am packaging William's file for the secure transfer. Now." I watched a progress bar appear on my screen. I needed William's data. Absolutely. But as the green bar slowly ticked forward, my strategic mind calculated the next necessary step to prove Audrey was not William's daughter. I could not just bring William's DNA to Dr. Thorne. I needed Audrey's verified medical profile as well. I needed the hospital's official record of her blood type, her genetic markers, and her medical history to cross-reference against William's data. "Jamal." "Wait," I said, injecting a note of sudden panicked realization into my voice. "I just looked at the preliminary checklist Dr. Thorne sent over. He needs a comprehensive maternal and paternal comparison to map the translocation safely. If the mutation jumped generations, he needs to see the full family tree structure. Can you please package Patricia and Audrey's archival files into the transfer as well?" There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the rapid clicking of his keyboard stop. "Clara, pulling file under your power of attorney is one thing. Pulling Audrey and Patricia's files is stretching the legal boundary of that document significantly. The system tracks the volume of the data payloads being exported." I know it is a massive risk," I pleaded, leaning into the microphone. "But Jamal, they are twins. Dr. Thorne said the genetic variables are incredibly volatile. If there is a secondary marker from Patricia's side that interacts with William's translocation, my babies could be at risk of severe developmental complications. Please, I just want to hand my doctor the complete puzzle so he does not have to guess with my children's lives." The silence stretched on, thick with tension. I held my breath, knowing I was pushing the limits of his goodwill. Jamal was an architect. He thrived on structure rules and doing things perfectly by the book. But he was also a father. He knew the primal, all-consuming terror of wanting to protect a child. "I will add them to the payload." Jamal finally said, his voice tight but resolute. "But Clara, this transfer is a one-time event. Once I close this encrypted tunnel, I am deleting the access logs and scrubbing the pathway. You have to make sure your doctor gets everything he needs from this single download because I cannot do this again. I promised Jamal." "Thank you." "You are saving us," I replied, meaning every single word, though not in the way he understood. The progress bar on my monitor reset, expanding to accommodate the massive influx of new data. I watched, mesmerized as decades of carefully guarded family secrets traveled through the fiber optic cables of the city, bypassing Patricia's iron grip and landing directly onto my heavily fortified local server. The irony was almost poetic. Patricia had spent her entire life curating a flawless, impenetrable image of high society perfection. She had spent 31 years guarding the gates of her deception, and it was taking less than 4 minutes for her own son-in-law to unknowingly hand over the exact tools required for her absolute destruction. "Transfer complete," Jamal announced. "The encrypted tunnel is closing. The files are locked with the password I texted you this morning. Good luck with the doctor. Clara, let know I am thinking of you both." He hung up the phone. The command prompt on my screen vanished, replaced by a single encrypted zip file resting on my desktop. I immediately disconnected my computer from the company network, ensuring the file was completely isolated and offline. I grabbed a secure military raw external hard drive from my locked desk drawer and initiated the decryption sequence using Jamal's password. I am a data analyst. I do not have a medical degree, and I could not independently decode the complex chromosomal sequences hidden within those files. But as the folders unzipped and populated my screen, I could see the raw structure of the data. I saw William's comprehensive genetic panel from a premium executive health screening he underwent 5 years ago. I saw Patricia's extensive medical history, and I saw Audrey's complete file, including the extensive blood work and genetic testing she underwent during her own pregnancy with Jamal Jr. I did not need to understand the complex medical jargon. I just needed to secure the payload and deliver it to the one man who could translate this data into a weapon of mass destruction. I safely ejected the hard drive, slipped it into my purse, and grabbed my coat. Dr. Thorne was waiting. Doctor. Thorne's office was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across his mahogany desk. I handed him the encrypted drive, watching as he connected it to his secure terminal. The decryption took only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. My heart hammered a relentless rhythm against my ribs. I had delivered the payload. Now I needed the expert translation. I have the files. Clara, Doctor. Thorne said, his eyes scanning the data populating his screen. This is an extraordinary amount of medical history. I'm isolating William's genetic profile. Now give me a moment to run the comparative analysis against your translocation markers. I sat in the guest chair, Ian's hand gripping mine so tightly I could feel his pulse echoing my own. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the soft, rapid clicking of Dr. Thorne's mouse. He wasn't just looking for a match. He was looking for the absolute, undeniable biological signature that tied me to the William family trust. Okay. Dr. Thorne breathed out, leaning back slightly. The analysis is complete. Clara. As I suspected, the translocation breakpoints align perfectly. You are a 100% biological match to William. There is absolutely no ambiguity. This genetic marker is a flawless, undeniable chain of custody. The confirmation was empowering. It solidified my position. But I wasn't just here to secure my own standing. I was here to demolish Patricia's. Now, I said, my voice steady. Run Audrey's profile. Dr. Thorne paused, his brow furrowing. Audrey's Clara. I understand the need to ensure the twins' safety, but running a full genetic comparison on your sister. Please, Dr. Thorne. I interrupted gently but firmly. This is no longer just about the twins' immediate medical needs. This is about understanding the origin of a systematic campaign of psychological and financial extortion. Patricia submitted a fraudulent DNA swab to avoid this exact moment. I need to know why. Doctor. Thorne held my gaze for a long moment, the ethical weight of the situation hanging in the air. Finally, he nodded slowly and turned back to his monitor. He initiated the comparative analysis, this time cross-referencing Audrey's extensive prenatal genetic panel with William's newly acquired profile. The progress bar moved faster this time. I felt the air leave the room. The truth, whatever it was about to be laid bare on that screen. Dr. Thorne stopped clicking. He stared at the monitor, his medical composure completely slipping. He took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and put them back on as if verifying the data a second time. This is staggering, he murmured, his voice barely audible. What is it? Ian demanded, leaning forward. Doctor. Thorne turned his monitor slightly toward us. The screen was filled with complex chromosomal charts, but the summary box at the top was highlighted in red. Clara, Dr. Thorne said, his voice dropping into a solemn clinical register. According to these verified hospital records, your sister Audrey shares absolutely 0% DNA with William. The words hung in the air, a devastating pronouncement that shattered reality as I knew it. Not a partial match, not a genetic anomaly, 0. She's an affair child, I whispered. The realization, hitting me with the force of a freight train. Yes, Dr. Thorne confirmed quietly. Biologically. She has no relation to your father whatsoever. 31 years. Patricia had been lying to William for 31 years. She had built her entire identity, her pristine socialite image on a massive, unforgivable deception. The golden child, the perfect daughter who could do no wrong, was not even a blood relative to the man funding her existence. The frantic puzzle pieces finally slammed together, forming a picture of absolute clarity. Patricia's terror when I requested William's DNA wasn't about the twins. It was about Audrey, the William Family Trust. $40 million bound by an ironclad direct bloodline stipulation was activating in 5 weeks. Patricia knew that the trust activation would trigger mandatory genetic verification for all heirs. She knew that the moment William's DNA was tested, the 31-year lie would detonate. Audrey would be exposed as an affair child, instantly disqualifying her from the $40 million inheritance. That was why Patricia had launched the relentless harassment campaign against me. That was why she had desperately tried to force me to sign the legal waiver, forfeiting my rights to the trust. If she could eliminate me, the only true biological heir, she could position Audrey as the sole remaining beneficiary. She was trying to secure the entire $40 million for her affair child before the estate lawyers discovered the truth. The sheer staggering audacity of the plan left me breathless. Patricia wasn't just greedy. She was orchestrating a massive multi-million-dollar fraud, and she was using my agonizing infertility journey as the emotional weapon to execute it. She wanted me out, I said, my voice hardening, the residual shock morphing into a cold, terrifying rage. She wanted me to forfeit my inheritance so Audrey could take it all. She used my miscarriages, my trauma, my deepest insecurities to try and bully me into signing away my birthright so she could protect her fraudulent daughter. Ian stood up, pacing the small office, his hands running through his hair. "It's extortion," he said, his voice vibrating with anger. "It's criminal fraud. She threatened my business. She sent you that $35,000 catering bill to break your spirit. She submitted a fake DNA swab to a doctor. She is a monster." "She is," I agreed, standing up slowly. "But she is a monster who just made the fatal mistake of handing me the weapon to destroy her." I looked at Dr. Thorne. "I need certified notarized copies of these reports. I need the raw data, the comparative analysis, and a formal medical statement confirming that I am the sole biological match to William." Dr. Thorne nodded grimly. "I will have my staff prepare the documents immediately. They will be legally binding." We left the clinic an hour later, armed with a thick dossier that held the power to obliterate Patricia's life. But as we drove back to the city, my analytical mind continued to process the data. There was still a missing piece to this equation. Audrey was entitled, arrogant, and cruel. But was she simply a beneficiary of Patricia's lie? Or was she an active participant in the fraud? Audrey lived a lavish lifestyle far beyond what her and Jamal's combined incomes could support. She always claimed her wealth came from vague brand sponsorships and influencer deals. But if Patricia was desperate enough to commit medical fraud to protect Audrey's inheritance, how far had that desperation already gone? I needed to follow the money. Patricia was a desperate woman guarding a 31-year secret, and desperate women leave financial footprints. I needed to know exactly how Audrey was funding her extravagant life. It was time to introduce a forensic accountant to the equation. I had the medical proof. I had the undeniable genetic footprint that proved Audrey was an affair child, and that Patricia was orchestrating a massive fraud. But as a data analyst, I know that possessing the smoking gun is only half the battle. You have to understand the entire ecosystem of the crime before you pull the trigger. Patricia was desperate. Yes, but Audrey's role in this was still a variable I needed to quantify. Was my sister simply a spoiled, entitled beneficiary of our mother's deception, or was she an active, Calculating participant Audrey's lifestyle had always been a point of friction. She and Jamal lived in a luxury downtown condo, drove high-end imported cars, and vacationed in places like St. Bart's and the Amalfi Coast. Jamal was a successful architect, but he was not pulling down the kind of money required to sustain that level of extravagant, relentless consumption. Audrey claimed she bridged the gap through brand sponsorships and her work as a lifestyle influencer. She was always posting unboxing videos and talking about her lucrative brand deals. But people who build legitimate businesses do not frantically demand the deeds to their sisters' houses. People with actual sustainable wealth do not panic when a single $35,000 catering bill comes due. The math on Audrey's life simply did not compute. And I needed to see the raw numbers. I needed to follow the money. I did not go to a standard private investigator. I went to a discreet, highly specialized forensic accountant named Evelyn Vance. She operated out of an unmarked office building in the Loop, specializing in high net worth divorce cases and corporate embezzlement. She was ruthless, brilliant, and entirely immune to the kind of socialite charm my family used as currency. I sat across from Evelyn, sliding a copy of the $35,000 catering bill across her desk, alongside a detailed list of Audrey and Jamal's known assets. "I need you to audit my sister's lifestyle," I explained, keeping my voice purely professional. "I need to know the origin of every single dollar that enters her accounts. I suspect her influencer income is a fabricated front for something much darker." Evelyn barely glanced at the catering bill. "Give me 72 hours. She said, her tone flat and confident. "If there is a hidden financial pipeline, I will find the source." The wait was agonizing, but I used the time to finalize my strategy with Ian and Dr. Thorne. When Evelyn finally called me back into her office, she did not look triumphant. She looked grim. She handed me a thick, spiral-bound dossier. "You were right to be suspicious." Clara Evelyn began tapping the cover of the report. "Your sister's influencer career generates a negligible amount of revenue. It barely covers the cost of her designer handbags. Her actual income stream is coming directly from a series of offshore shell companies and obscure LLCs." I opened the dossier. The financial diagrams Evelyn had mapped out were complex, but the trajectory of the money was undeniable. "And who controls these shell companies?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Your mother." Evelyn. Confirmed. Patricia has been operating a highly sophisticated financial pipeline for over a decade. She has been systematically siphoning funds from Williams' various corporate accounts, masking the withdrawals as consulting fees or administrative overhead, and funneling the money directly to Audrey. The sheer scale of the embezzlement was staggering. Millions of dollars had been quietly drained from my father's empire and deposited into Audrey's lap. But why the elaborate shell game? Why not just give Audrey the money directly? Because it wasn't an allowance. I realized the cold, hard truth settling in my stomach. It was a payoff. Evelyn nodded, turning to a specific page in the report. 13 years ago. When Audrey turned 18, there was a massive sudden transfer of funds. Nearly $500,000 was moved in a single week. After that, the payments became regular, structured, and entirely secret. The payments increased significantly whenever Audrey hit a major life milestone: graduating college, buying the condo, getting married. 18. The age when medical records become private. The age when a person can independently request a copy of their own original birth certificate or order a commercial DNA test without parental consent. Audrey found out I whispered the final horrific piece of the puzzle sliding into place. She found out she wasn't William's daughter when she turned 18, and she didn't keep the secret out of loyalty to her mother. She weaponized it, Ian said, his voice hard as stone as he read over my shoulder. Exactly, Evelyn agreed. Based on the structure and frequency of these transfers, this is a classic textbook extortion ring. Audrey has been systematically blackmailing Patricia for 13 years. Patricia pays her to keep quiet. and Audrey uses the money to fund her entire fake influencer lifestyle, all while hiding the truth from her husband, Jamal. The nausea hit me in waves. My sister wasn't just a spoiled brat. She was a predator. She had been bleeding our mother dry for over a decade. And Patricia, terrified of losing her social standing and her access to William's fortune, had paid the ransom every single month. But the extortion ring was collapsing. The William family trust activation date was looming, threatening to expose the entire operation. Patricia was out of time and out of options. She could no longer hide the truth from the estate lawyers. She needed Audrey to be the sole heir to cover up the missing millions and legitimize the stolen funds. That is why Patricia was trying to force me to forfeit my share. I said the complete picture finally devastatingly clear. If I signed away my rights, Audrey would inherit the trust. The money Audrey had been extorting would simply look like an early inheritance, and Patricia's embezzlement would be buried forever. They were working together. I closed the dossier. The forensic accounting report wasn't just evidence of financial crimes. It was the ultimate proof of their moral bankruptcy. They had spent my entire life calling me a failure, making me feel worthless, while they operated a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy behind closed doors. Evelyn looked at me, her professional detachment slipping just a fraction. This is enough evidence to trigger a massive federal investigation. Clara, what do you want to do with it? I looked at the meticulously documented proof of their deceit. I didn't want to just hand this over to the authorities. That was too clean, too removed. I wanted them to look me in the eye when their empire collapsed. I am going to set a trap, I said, my voice eerily calm. I am going to give them exactly what they want, and then I am going to burn them to the ground. I drove home from the accountant's secure office with a singular, chilling focus. The fear that had dictated my entire existence was completely gone, replaced by the precise, calculating energy I usually reserved for dismantling corrupted data networks. Ian sat quietly in the passenger seat, his hand resting reassuringly on my knee. We spent the entire commute strategizing the exact sequence of events required to corral my mother, my sister, and my father into one room. I needed maximum exposure. I needed undeniable finality. A truly exceptional data analyst knows that exposing a fraudulent system requires presenting the irrefutable data to the system's administrator in an environment where they cannot escape or deny the facts. In this case, the administrator was William, and the environment had to be perfectly controlled. The next morning, I sat at my dining room table and placed my phone in front of me. I had spent the last hour mentally preparing for the performance of a lifetime. I needed to convince a master manipulator that she had successfully broken my spirit. I took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of exhaustion and sorrow I had felt over the past 4 years, and dialed Patricia's number. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was sharp and impatient, laced with the usual condescension. Clara, I do not have time for games today. Have you signed the trust waiver? Or do I need to make that phone call to Ian's clients? I let out a ragged, trembling sigh, making sure my breathing sounded shallow and defeated. Patricia, I said, forcing my voice to crack perfectly. You win. I am done. I cannot fight you anymore. The silence on the line was profound. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, evaluating whether this was a trick. I leaned into the microphone and let a single staged sob escape my throat. The fertility clinic called, I lied, weaving a thread of my real past trauma into the fabrication to make it believable. My numbers dropped again. It is over. My body cannot do it. I am exhausted. I am heartbroken. And I cannot handle this family war on top of losing another chance at a baby. You want the trust. Fine. It is yours. I will sign the waiver. I just want you to leave Ian and me alone. Let Audrey have the lineage. I surrender. The transformation in Patricia's tone was instantaneous and utterly nauseating. The aggressive extortionist vanished immediately, replaced by a sickly, Sweet, victorious matriarch. Oh, Clara, I told you to be realistic. This is for the best. Truly, you are making the right choice for the family legacy. It is a tragedy about your fertility. Of course, but now Audrey and Jamal Jr. can secure the lineage without all this unnecessary legal tension. Her sheer arrogance was staggering. She was standing on the precipice of losing a $40 million empire and facing federal fraud charges. Yet, she sounded like a queen who had just successfully swatted away a bothersome fly. I gripped the edge of my dining table, channeling my rage into the final crucial phase of the setup. If I am going to forfeit my biological right to a $40 million trust, I said, my voice sounding hollow and resigned, I am not doing it by mailing a piece of paper through a courier like a coward. I want this done officially, legally, and permanently. I want absolute assurance that you will never threaten my husband's career or demand another cent from me again. Patricia scoffed lightly, clearly amused by my demand for formality and defeat. Fine. What exactly do you propose? Clara. I want a formal dinner, I stated. I want William there. I want Audrey and Jamal there. And most importantly, I want lead corporate attorneys present to witness the signature and execute the document immediately. If I am signing my birthright away, I want the estate lawyers to look me in the eye and finalize it on the spot so I never have to deal with this family's finances ever again. I held my breath. This was the trap. If Patricia suspected anything, she would refuse to involve William's lawyers. But I was counting on her vanity and her overwhelming relief. She had spent 13 years paying blackmail money to cover up her affair. The finish line was inches away. If I signed that waiver in front of the estate lawyers, Audrey became the sole heir, and Patricia's embezzlement would be buried forever under the guise of legitimate inheritance. I could practically hear her smiling through the phone. She was so blinded by her own perceived brilliance that she completely missed the snare closing around her ankle. That is a very mature, practical decision, Clara, Patricia said, her voice dripping with absolute triumph. William will be thrilled to have this messy business resolved before his birthday. I will arrange everything. We will make it an elegant evening. A proper send-off for your obligations to this family. Book a private room. I insisted, playing the part of the humiliated daughter to the very end. I do not want to be crying in the middle of a crowded restaurant when I sign away my future. Consider it done, she replied eagerly. I will book the private conservatory room at Lumiere for this Friday. I will ensure William and his legal team bring the finalized documents. Wear something nice. Clara. Let us try to maintain some dignity. She hung up the phone. I lowered my device, the fake tears instantly drying on my cheeks. I looked across the room at Ian. He had been listening on speakerphone, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. She took it, I said, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. She took the bait completely. She is bringing William, Audrey, and the corporate lawyers exactly where I want them. Ian walked over and kissed my forehead, his eyes dark with protective resolve. She thinks she just secured $40 million. A Michelin-starred restaurant known for its oppressive exclusivity and impenetrable private dining rooms. It was the perfect stage. Patricia thought she was organizing a quiet, dignified surrender, where she could legally erase me from the family tree and secure her fraudulent daughter's financial future. She wanted a formal gathering to legitimize her victory. I was going to use that exact formality to ensure her destruction was a matter of official legal record. But before I could step into that dining room and drop the bomb that would obliterate my parents' marriage and my younger sister's life, I had one final crucial piece of collateral damage to manage. Jamal Audrey's husband had unknowingly provided me with the digital keys to the hospital archive. He was a good father and an honest man who believed he was married to a loyal wife. He had absolutely no idea Audrey was a manipulative extortionist who had been blackmailing her own mother for millions of dollars to fund a fake lifestyle. Jamal was going to be sitting at that table on Friday night. When the shrapnel of this revelation started flying, it was going to hit him just as hard as it hit William. I could not let an innocent man walk into the devastating blast zone entirely blind. I needed to orchestrate a separate meeting with him. I needed to give him a subtle but urgent warning to protect himself and his son before the entire William family legacy burned to absolute ash. I called Jamal the next morning, asking him to meet me during his lunch break at a quiet botanical garden near his architectural firm. I chose an outdoor location specifically to avoid any chance of being overheard by his colleagues or Audrey's friends. The crisp autumn air bit through my coat as I waited on a secluded wooden bench, watching the leaves fall. Jamal arrived exactly on time, carrying 2 coffees, his brow furrowed with mild concern. He handed me a cup and sat down, his posture relaxed, but his eyes scanning my face for clues. He thought this meeting was a follow-up to the medical records he had secured for me. He thought I was going to give him an update on the twins and thank him for his help. I was going to thank him, but the update I had for him had nothing to do with my pregnancy and everything to do with his wife's catastrophic deceit. Jamal. I started keeping my voice incredibly steady and keeping my eyes locked directly on his. I asked you here today because you did me a profound favor when you accessed those hospital archives. You acted out of pure kindness to protect my unborn children. You are a man of deep integrity, a genuinely good person, and a dedicated father to your son. Because I respect you, I cannot let you walk into the crossfire of what is about to happen without giving you a chance to brace yourself. Jamal lowered his coffee cup, his relaxed posture instantly vanishing. He sat up straight, the professional architect replaced by a concerned husband and father. What crossfire? Clara, is something wrong with the medical data? Did Patricia find out I accessed the server? I shook my head slowly. Patricia does not know about the server, and the medical data gave my doctor exactly what he needed. The problem is what else the data revealed. He stared at me, waiting for the rest of the explanation. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Tomorrow night, Patricia is hosting a formal dinner at Lumiere. She thinks I am coming to officially sign away my rights to the William Family Trust. She thinks she has won. I need you to listen to me very carefully. That dinner is not going to be a peaceful legal formality. It is going to be the absolute destruction of my parents' marriage and Audrey's entire life. I am going to detonate a truth so massive that there will be nothing left of this family by dessert. Jamal frowned, his confusion morphing into a protective defensiveness. Clara, I know you and Audrey have your issues, and I know Patricia has been awful to you. But destroying the family. What are you talking about? What does Audrey have to do with your trust fund waiver? Everything, I stated coldly. She has everything to do with it. I cannot give you the exact details right now. Jamal, if I tell you today, you will go home and ask her about it. Audrey is a master manipulator. She will spin a web of lies, play the victim, and convince you that I am insane. You need to see the undeniable certified proof presented formally in front of William and his corporate lawyers. You need to hear it when she cannot escape or deny the facts. But I am warning you now because the collateral damage will directly hit your household. I need you to attend that dinner. Do not let Audrey convince you to stay home with the baby. Be in that room. And if you have a personal lawyer, someone who represents you and not my father's companies, bring them. Tell Audrey it is just a precaution since legal documents are being signed. Jamal looked at me as if I had lost my mind. A lawyer. Clara, you are scaring me. What has my wife done? I stood up, pulling my coat tighter around myself. Look at your finances. Jamal, look at your joint bank accounts tonight. Quietly audit your household wealth. Look past the surface-level income you bring in as an architect. Look closely at the massive influxes of cash Audrey claims are from her brand sponsorships and influencer deals. dig into the offshore accounts and the obscure limited liability companies she uses to filter her money. She has been funding a lifestyle that far exceeds your legitimate income, and the source of that money is rooted in a 13-year-old extortion ring. She has been blackmailing Patricia for millions of dollars to keep a devastating secret buried. The color completely drained from Jamal's face. He stood up, his coffee cup falling to the ground, and spilling dark liquid across the concrete path. Extortion, blackmail. Clara, you cannot just say words like that and walk away. Audrey is my wife. She is the mother of my son. She would never participate in something so blatantly criminal. I looked at him with profound sympathy, knowing the agony of realizing the people you love are monsters in disguise. She is a stranger to you. Jamal, you married a carefully constructed illusion. Audit the bank accounts tonight. Follow the money trail. Look for the shell companies. The financial data will not lie to you. When you see the numbers, you will realize I am telling you the absolute truth. Bring a lawyer to dinner tomorrow. You are going to need one to protect yourself and your son when the police inevitably get involved. I turned and walked away down the garden path, leaving Jamal standing frozen by the bench. I did not look back. I had given him the warning he deserved. He was a smart man, and his professional mindset would eventually override his emotional denial. He would check the bank statements. He would see the impossible sums of money flowing into their accounts from mysterious corporate entities. He would realize his entire marriage was funded by a criminal conspiracy. I drove back to the suburbs with the radio turned off the silence inside my car, allowing my mind to organize the final pieces of tomorrow's execution. The afternoon sun had dipped below the horizon by the time I pulled into our driveway, casting long, stark shadows across the meticulously manicured lawn. When I walked through the front door, the comforting scent of roasted garlic and rosemary filled the hallway. Ian was in the kitchen, but the dining room table had already been cleared of its usual centerpieces. In their place sat a heavy-duty laser printer, several boxes of high-grade presentation paper, and 3 thick black leather binders. He had taken the afternoon off to prepare our war room. I dropped my keys on the granite counter and walked straight to the table, unpacking my briefcase with methodical precision. I pulled out the encrypted flash drive containing the hospital archives and the sealed envelope Dr. Eris Thorne had provided. Ian handed me a cup of hot tea and stood beside me, his presence a solid grounding force in the center of the storm. We worked for hours in deliberate, concentrated silence. We printed Dr. Thorne's certified notarized genetic reports. First, the documents were pristine, filled with complex chromosomal mapping that culminated in 2 undeniable conclusions highlighted in bright yellow ink. The first conclusion confirmed my balanced translocation, establishing my 100% biological match to William. The second conclusion exposed Audrey's 0% genetic relation, legally severing her from our family tree forever. We placed these explosive medical records into the first section of each leather binder, slipping them into crystal-clear plastic sleeves to ensure they looked as clinical and unforgiving as the data they contained. Next came the legal cornerstone of our trap. I had obtained a certified copy of the William Family Trust documentation. We printed the specific pages detailing the strict inheritance stipulations. I used a crimson pen to underline the exact phrasing my great-grandfather had used decades ago. The funds are to be distributed exclusively and entirely to direct biological bloodline heirs. There was absolutely no ambiguity, no hidden loophole, no legal gray area that Patricia's high-priced attorneys could ever exploit. The language was absolute. We slid the trust documents into the second section of the binders, positioning them immediately after the genetic bombshell. The sequencing was designed to be highly lethal. First, we prove Audrey is an affair child. Second, we prove that this biological fact legally disqualifies her from the $40 million fortune she had been aggressively counting on. The third and final section of the binders required the most careful assembly. We printed the comprehensive dossier provided by the forensic accountant. The pages detailed 13 years of systemic calculated financial extortion. We organized the complex flowcharts showing money bleeding out of Williams' corporate accounts, filtering through a labyrinth of shell companies and obscure limited liability corporations entirely controlled by Patricia and landing directly into Audrey's personal offshore accounts. We included the dates of the massive cash transfers that aligned perfectly with Audrey turning 18. The financial data painted a horrifying picture of a mother paying millions in ransom to her own daughter to hide a scandalous affair. We made sure the audit trail was so meticulously documented that Williams' corporate lawyers would have enough concrete evidence to freeze Patricia and Audrey's assets before the dessert course was even served tomorrow night. By midnight, the 3 black leather binders were complete. They sat in a neat, menacing row in the center of our dining room table, holding the power to annihilate a 31-year-old lie. I ran my fingertips over the smooth leather cover of the central binder, feeling the immense weight of what we had just compiled. For my entire life, I had been the designated scapegoat. I had internalized every cruel insult, every financial threat, and every manipulative tactic Patricia and Audrey had used to diminish my worth. I had spent 34 years desperately trying to prove my value to people who viewed me as nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to their insatiable greed. I looked down at my hands resting on the leather covers. They were not shaking anymore. The anxiety that had plagued my fertility journey, the desperate need for maternal validation, the quiet sobbing on cold bathroom floors. All of it was entirely gone. The woman who had cried in her office when Audrey demanded the deed to this very house no longer existed. That broken, neglected daughter had been thoroughly eradicated. Ian stepped up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. He looked at the 3 binders, his eyes reflecting the cold, calculating determination that now defined my existence. He turned me around to face him, gripping my shoulders with a fierce, unwavering intensity that took my breath away. "Do not just go in there tomorrow and take back what is yours," Clara Ian said, his voice a low, commanding rumble that sent a shiver of pure adrenaline down my spine. "Do not just secure your inheritance and walk away. Burn their fake kingdom to the ground. Leave absolutely nothing standing." I looked into my husband's eyes, seeing the unyielding support of a man who had watched me suffer for far too long. He did not want me to merely survive my toxic family anymore. He wanted me to conquer them completely. "I will." I promised the solemn vow, sealing my absolute transformation. By tomorrow night, they will have nothing left to hide behind. We turned off the dining room lights, leaving the devastating dossier resting in the shadows. I walked upstairs with perfect, absolute clarity. I went to my closet and carefully selected my outfit for the formal dinner at Lumiere. I bypassed the soft, accommodating pastel colors my mother had always forced me to wear to fade into the background. Instead, I chose a structured razor-sharp suit in a deep, unforgiving crimson. It was not an outfit for a grieving, infertile daughter signing away her birthright in defeat. She is a woman marching to war. Tomorrow I was going to sit across from the people who had tortured me, look them dead in the eye, and execute the most devastating data drop of their entire lives. The heavy oak doors of Lumiere swung open, revealing a foyer bathed in the warm golden glow of crystal chandeliers. Ian and I handed our coats to the impeccably dressed hostess, who immediately guided us past the crowded main dining area and toward the private conservatory room at the back of the restaurant. My heels clicked rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I carried a sleek designer handbag while Ian held a heavy, reinforced leather briefcase containing the 3 black binders. The air in the restaurant smelled of truffles, aged wine, and quiet arrogance. It was the exact environment my mother thrived in, a place where status could be bought and power was displayed through excessive consumption. The hostess opened the frosted glass doors to the conservatory, stepping aside to let us enter. The private dining room was practically dripping with weaponized wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the glittering Chicago skyline. But the people sitting around the massive mahogany table were entirely focused on their own reflection. My father, William, sat at the head of the table. He was flanked by two sharp, aggressive-looking corporate lawyers dressed in identical charcoal suits. Their briefcases were already open, thick stacks of legal documents resting next to their crystal water goblets. My mother, Patricia, and my sister, Audrey, sat across from them. They were draped in ostentatious designer clothing dripping in diamonds that caught the chandelier light with every movement. Patricia wore a silk emerald gown, while Audrey sported a heavily tailored white dress that screamed desperation for attention. And sitting at the far end of the table, isolated from the corporate posturing, was Jamal. He looked profoundly uncomfortable. His eyes met mine the second I walked in, carrying a heavy, silent acknowledgement. He had audited his bank accounts. He had seen the offshore money. He had brought his own legal counsel, a quiet, unassuming man sitting slightly behind him, entirely unnoticed by my arrogant family. Jamal was no longer the blissfully ignorant husband. He was a man watching a train wreck in slow motion, bracing for the inevitable impact. The moment Ian and I took our seats, the psychological warfare commenced. Patricia did not bother with basic pleasantries or offering us a drink. She looked me up and down, her eyes narrowing as she took in my structured crimson suit. "Clara, you always make such severe fashion choices." Patricia sighed, signaling a waiter to pour her more champagne. "You are signing a major legal document tonight, not attending a corporate board meeting. A little maternal softness would not kill you." But then again, I suppose a plain structured suit fits a plain structured life. It is probably for the best you are giving up the trust. The lineage requires a certain elegance you simply never possessed. Audrey laughed, that familiar grating sound designed entirely to belittle and humiliate. "Oh, Mom, let her be. She spends her entire life staring at spreadsheets in a gray cubicle. You cannot expect a mediocre data analyst to understand high society aesthetics. She probably thinks crimson makes her look powerful." Ian shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening, but I placed a gentle hand on his knee under the table. I did not need him to defend me tonight. I wanted them to dig their hole as deep as possible. Audrey leaned across the table, flashing her diamond rings in the ambient light. "Do not feel too bad about the house," Clara Audrey continued, her voice dripping with fake sugary pity. "Jamal Jr. really needs the yard space, and once you sign these papers today, you can use whatever small savings you have to buy a nice, quiet condo in the city. It will be much easier for you to manage since you will not have any children to clean up after." I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with her. I let her cruel words hang in the silent air, watching as Jamal physically recoiled from his wife's sheer toxicity. He was staring at Audrey as if looking at a total stranger, his expression a mix of horror and absolute disgust. He was finally witnessing the monster I had endured for 3 decades. The mask was completely off, and the reality of her cruelty was fully exposed. William tapped his crystal glass with a heavy silver spoon, utterly irritated by the delay and completely indifferent to the emotional abuse happening right in front of him. "Enough socializing. Patricia, I have an early tea time tomorrow with the hospital board, and I want this handled immediately so I can go home." He gestured to his lead corporate attorney, a man who looked like a shark in a tailored suit. The lawyer slid a thick stack of papers across the polished mahogany table, placing a heavy gold fountain pen directly in front of my empty plate. Clara, the lawyer, stated in a bored mechanical drone, "These documents constitute a formal, irrevocable waiver of your rights as a biological beneficiary to the William Family Trust. By signing this, you acknowledge that you forfeit all future claims to the $40 million principal and its dividends, effectively removing yourself from the direct bloodline inheritance. We need your signature on pages 4, 7, and 9. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes glittering with manic triumph. Her 31-year-old secret was seconds away from being permanently buried. She thought she had won. "Just sign the papers, Clara. Let us get this over with so we can enjoy our expensive dinner." I looked at the gold pen resting on the dark wood. I looked at the lawyers waiting for my surrender. I looked at William, checking his watch, clearly annoyed by my hesitation. And finally, I looked at Patricia and Audrey, their faces twisted into greedy smirks. The trap was fully set. The administrators were present, the data verified. I reached out, pushing the heavy gold pen away from the legal documents. The metal scraped against the polished mahogany, a harsh grating sound that shattered the quiet anticipation in the private dining room. The lead corporate attorney blinked, his hand hovering over the paperwork as if his programming had malfunctioned. William frowned, letting out a sharp sigh of profound irritation. Patricia's triumphant smile faltered, her emerald silk gown suddenly looking less like royal attire and more like fragile armor that was about to be severely tested. Clara. Patricia hissed, her voice a low warning rattle. Pick up the pen. We do not have time for one of your emotional episodes. Sign the waiver. I will not be signing anything today. Patricia, I said. My voice was perfectly leveled, entirely devoid of the fear that had governed my childhood. There is absolutely no legal or moral requirement for me to forfeit my birthright. The trust is designated for direct bloodline heirs. And as it turns out, I have just secured the next generation of that exact lineage. I am pregnant. The announcement hung in the air. I waited for a gasp, a congratulations, even a flicker of basic human surprise. Instead, the room remained suffocatingly cold. Patricia did not even put down her crystal wine glass. She looked at me, her lips curling into a practiced, elegant sneer. Let us hope this one is smarter than you, Clara. Audrey let out a sharp, mocking laugh, leaning back into her chair as if watching a mildly amusing television show. She crossed her arms, her diamond bracelets catching the chandelier light, or at least viable enough to make it past the first trimester. Though I would not hold my breath, my father, William, did not defend me. He did not reprimand his wife or his supposed younger daughter for their staggering cruelty. He simply checked his gold watch, tapped the face of it, and sighed loudly. Can we eat now? I have an early tea time tomorrow, and this dramatic display is cutting into my evening. I looked at my husband, Ian. He was a rock of quiet strength beside me, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. His eyes were blazing with a protective fury. He was holding back only because I had specifically asked him to let me handle the execution. I gave him a look, and he gave me a single firm nod. It was time. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply stood up, smoothing the front of my crimson suit. I reached into my designer bag and pulled out the sealed, heavily embossed envelope bearing the official crest of Dr. Eris Thorne's Genetic and Obstetric Laboratory. The heavy paper felt like a loaded weapon in my hands. Since we are so concerned with legalities and bloodlines tonight, I announced, breaking the seal with my thumb. I brought some official documentation of my own, a certified medical and genetic report mandated by the high-risk nature of my pregnancy. I unfolded the thick stationery. The corporate lawyers exchanged a swift, uneasy glance. They smelled liability. Statement 1, I read aloud, my voice ringing clear and absolute across the silent dining room. The patient, Clara, is currently pregnant with 2 viable, healthy twins, successfully passing the critical first trimester viability threshold. Audrey rolled her eyes, scoffing loudly. Congratulations on doing the bare minimum of biological functioning. Clara, that does not change the fact that Mom wants you off the trust documents. Statement 2. I continued, raising my voice just enough to slice right through her interruption. Comprehensive genetic sequencing has identified the cause of the patient's previous miscarriages. The patient possesses a rare chromosomal anomaly known as a balanced translocation. This specific genetic marker was inherited directly and undeniably from her biological father. It is absolute medical proof that Clara carries the exact genetic signature of William, confirming her as his 100% biological daughter and an indisputable heir to the William family trust. William's head snapped up. His eyes darted from his watch to my face. The lead attorney suddenly sat up incredibly straight, instinctively pulling the forfeit waiver back toward his side of the table. A verified genetic confirmation of paternity completely nullified any argument Patricia could make about my supposed unworthiness. Patricia's face drained of all color. The smug, elegant sneer vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. She dropped her wine glass. It tipped over, spilling expensive red wine across the pristine white tablecloth like a spreading pool of blood. "Stop." She choked out her voice, suddenly ragged. "Stop reading that right now." I did not stop. I locked eyes with Audrey, who was staring at the spilled wine in sheer confusion. Statement 3. I read delivering the final fatal blow, cross-referencing the comprehensive medical archives accessed from the Presidio Health Network. Comparative genetic analysis confirms that Audrey possesses a 0% genetic relation to William. She is an affair child completely lacking the required DNA marker, confirming she is entirely ineligible for the William family trust. The silence that slammed into the room was absolute deafening and violently heavy. It was the sound of a 31-year-old empire evaporating into thin air. I lowered the paper, staring directly into the epicenter of the destruction. Patricia let out a guttural, wretched sob, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. Her perfect socialite facade shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She was weeping uncontrollably, her chest heaving as the walls of her massive multi-million-dollar deception collapsed directly onto her shoulders. She tried to reach across the table, her manicured fingers grasping blindly at the air, but there was nowhere left to hide. Audrey sat frozen, her mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. The arrogant, cruel golden child was gone, replaced by a woman who had just been legally and biologically erased from the billionaire lifestyle she felt unconditionally entitled to. Her eyes darted wildly to Jamal, seeking her usual source of blind comfort. But Jamal did not look at her with sympathy. He looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. He had audited the bank accounts just as I warned him to. He knew the money was dirty, and now he knew exactly why. He slowly pushed his chair away from her, deliberately putting physical distance between himself and his fraudulent wife. I looked at William. He was completely rigid, his face an ashen mask of pure shock as his brain processed the devastating reality. The daughter he had favored, the wife he had trusted the lineage he was so obsessed with preserving. It was all a spectacularly cruel illusion. The two corporate attorneys beside him were already moving, snapping their briefcases shut and pulling out fresh legal pads. They recognized a catastrophic liability when they saw one. I had not just refused to surrender. I had executed a flawless, undeniable demolition. I placed Dr. Thorne's letter precisely on the center of the table, beside me. Ian unlocked the heavy leather briefcase, pulling out the 3 thick black binders we had prepared. The data drop was complete, and the fallout was only just beginning. Ian placed the 3 heavy black binders onto the polished mahogany table with a resounding thud that echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. The sheer physical weight of the evidence seemed to suck the remaining oxygen out of the room. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. The spilled red wine continued its slow, steady drip off the edge of the table, staining the plush carpet below. Then survival instincts kicked in. Patricia snapped out of her weeping, her sorrow instantly transforming into cornered feral rage. She shot up from her chair, her emerald silk gown rustling violently. "She is a liar," Patricia screamed, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. "She is a sick, delusional psychopath." "William, do not look at those papers. She fabricated all of this because she is insanely jealous of her sister. She has always been mentally unstable. You know this. She paid some fraudulent clinic to print fake lab results just to ruin this family." Audrey immediately mirrored her mother's panic, though her voice lacked its usual arrogant edge. It sounded shrill and terrified. "Dad, you cannot possibly believe this garbage," Audrey pleaded, leaning toward William with wide, desperate eyes. "Clara is having a mental breakdown. She is just infertile and bitter, and she's trying to drag us down with her. Make her leave. Throw them both out right now." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to defend my sanity or my evidence against their frantic screaming. I simply looked at the lead corporate attorney sitting beside my father. He was a man who dealt in empirical data risk assessment and legally binding contracts. He did not care about family drama. He cared about liability. I slid the first black binder directly across the smooth mahogany surface. It glided effortlessly, stopping precisely in front of the lead lawyer. "Every document inside that binder is fully certified," I stated, my voice cutting through Patricia's hysterical shouting with absolute icy precision. "You will find the notarized genetic reports from Dr. Aris Thorne, a leading specialist in this city. You will find the official chain of custody for the medical records legally obtained from the Presidio Health Network archives. And behind the medical tab, you will find a comprehensive forensic accounting audit detailing exactly where your client's money has been going for the past 13 years. The lawyer did not look at Patricia. He did not look at Audrey. He looked at me, assessing the supreme confidence in my posture, and then he opened the binder. The room fell into a suffocating hush as the heavy card's StockX pages turned. The only sound was the sharp, methodical rustle of paper as the attorney scrutinized the certified seals, the hospital letterheads, and the official laboratory signatures. His trained eyes scanned the highlighted genetic mapping, verifying the 0% match. Then he flipped to the financial section. I watched his professional detachment falter. His eyes widened slightly as he processed the flowcharts Evelyn Vance had meticulously constructed. He saw the millions of dollars bleeding out of William's corporate accounts funneled through Patricia's offshore shell companies and deposited directly into Audrey's personal holdings. He saw the blackmail schedule. The attorney slowly closed the binder. He leaned over and whispered exactly 4 words into my father's ear. I could not hear them, but the impact was instantaneous. William reached out with a slightly shaking hand and pulled the binder toward himself. He put on his gold-rimmed reading glasses. For decades, my father had been a passive observer in his own home, perfectly content to let Patricia orchestrate our family dynamics while he focused on accumulating wealth. He had willfully ignored my emotional neglect. He had celebrated Audrey's unearned triumphs. He had blindly funded their lavish existence, assuming his throne was secure. Now he was reading the documented proof of his own absolute foolishness. I watched the color drain completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He stared at the genetic report, confirming Audrey was the product of another man. His eyes tracked the exact date Patricia had submitted a fake DNA swab to my clinic to cover her tracks. Patricia was hyperventilating now, clutching the edge of the table. "William, please," she begged, her voice dropping to a pathetic, breathy whine. "It is manipulated data. Clara hired hackers. It is not real." William turned the page to the forensic accounting report. The financial betrayal struck him harder than the biological one, to a man who worshipped his fortune. Realizing his own wife and supposed daughter had been running a multi-million-dollar extortion ring right under his nose was the ultimate violation. He saw the exact dates Patricia had wired hundreds of thousands of dollars to Audrey. He saw the shell companies created using his own corporate infrastructure to launder the blackmail payments. Decades of Patricia's gaslighting flashed before his eyes. Every time she had demanded an increase in her household allowance. Every time she had insisted Audrey needed another massive cash gift for a condo or a luxury vacation. It was never generosity. It was ransom. He had been cuckolded, lied to, and financially drained by a daughter who did not share a single drop of his blood. And in the same horrifying moment of clarity, William looked up from the binder and locked eyes with me, his true bloodline. The daughter who carried his exact genetic mutation. The daughter he had alienated, ignored, and allowed to be emotionally tortured for 34 years. I sat across from him, entirely self-made, completely independent, and expecting absolutely nothing from his wallet. I had not come to beg for a share of his $40 million. I had come to show him that his entire life was a lie. The patriarch finally awakened from his 31-year slumber. The transformation was terrifying to witness. The passive, indifferent father vanished, replaced by a ruthless, humiliated billionaire who had just discovered a massive theft in his own house. William slowly removed his reading glasses and placed them on the table. The silence in the conservatory room was so heavy it felt like the air pressure had dropped. He did not yell. He did not throw the binder. He simply turned his head and looked at Patricia. He looked at the woman he had been married to for over 3 decades, seeing her not as his elegant high society wife, but as a parasitic thief. Then he looked at Audrey, the golden child who had arrogantly demanded my house just a week ago, seeing her as nothing more than a fraudulent extortionist. "Shut your mouth," Patricia William commanded. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a lethal vibrating authority that instantly froze the blood in her veins. "Do not speak another word." The empire had officially crumbled. The illusion was dead. The fallout was here. Jamal pushed his chair back. The mahogany legs scraped loudly against the floor, shattering the frozen tableau of the dining room. He had been a silent observer, watching the grotesque reality of his wife's family unfold. Audrey turned to him instantly, her eyes wide and pleading. She reached her hand out toward him, hoping her usual manipulation would save her. "Do not touch me," Jamal commanded, his voice trembling with absolute revulsion. "I did exactly what Clara told me to do. I audited our accounts yesterday afternoon. I saw the massive wire transfers from those obscure corporate entities and offshore routing numbers. When I asked you about that money last year, you swore it was from a long-term cosmetic sponsorship." Audrey sobbed. "Jamal, please, I can explain everything. I was securing our future. You were blackmailing your own mother." Jamal fired back. "You discovered you were the product of an affair, and instead of dealing with the truth, you used it to extort millions. You funded our entire marriage and our condo with dirty stolen ransom money. You made me an accomplice to a criminal conspiracy. You are a predator." "Audrey, I am going straight to my lawyer right now. I am filing for immediate divorce and I am taking Jamal Jr. My son will not be raised in a house built on fraud, and he will not be raised by a mother who treats human beings like financial hostages." Audrey shrieked a primal, terrified sound. "No! You cannot take my baby! You cannot leave me! Watch me," Jamal stated with absolute finality. He turned to me, giving a respectful nod of gratitude for the warning I had provided. Then, without looking back at his weeping wife, he walked out of the room. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind him, sealing Audrey's fate. She had lost her husband, child, and facade in 2 minutes. The sudden departure snapped William out of his shock. The patriarch turned his attention away from his illegitimate daughter and focused entirely on the woman who orchestrated the 31-year deception. Patricia was shaking violently, clutching her emerald gown, unable to meet his furious gaze. William did not yell. He operated with the cold, mechanical ruthlessness that had made him a titan in the corporate world. He turned to the lead corporate attorney at his right. "I want all joint accounts frozen immediately." William ordered, his voice echoing like breaking ice. "Call the banking administrators right now. Cancel every single black card, platinum card, and corporate expense account registered to Patricia and Audrey. I want their digital access revoked before they pull out their phones." The lawyer pulled out his phone and immediately began dialing the estate's private wealth managers, barking rapid instructions to sever the financial lifelines. "William, please, you cannot do this," Patricia begged, falling to her knees. "I am still your wife. We built a life together. I made a terrible mistake. But I did it to protect you from the scandal and protect our family image. You protected nothing but your own bottom line, William stated, looking down at her with pure contempt. You made a fool out of me for 3 decades. You brought another man's child into my home, passed her off as my heir, and systematically embezzled millions from my companies to pay for her silence. You are a common criminal thief wearing expensive jewelry bought with my stolen money. He turned to his second attorney, a man specifically handling criminal liability and corporate security. Call the estate manager. Change the security codes on the main gates, the front doors, and the private garages. Instruct the security detail that Patricia and Audrey are no longer permitted on the premises. If they attempt to enter the property, have them arrested for trespassing. Pack their personal items into garbage bags and leave them at the service entrance. Audrey wailed, clutching her face as the reality of her new destitute existence crushed her. Dad, please. Where are we supposed to go? I have nothing. Do not ever call me Dad again. William commanded, his voice lethal. You have exactly what you stole, and I promise you I will recover every single cent of it. William stood up from the table, buttoning his suit jacket with terrifying composure. He looked down at Patricia, who was curled on the floor in a puddle of spilled wine and shattered dignity. I am filing for divorce tomorrow morning, William announced, delivering the ultimate sentence. But that will be the least of your concerns. I am directing my legal team to hand this entire forensic accounting dossier over to the federal authorities. I am pressing full criminal charges for wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and extortion. You are not going to walk away from this with a generous alimony settlement. Patricia, you are going to walk away in handcuffs. I will spend whatever it takes to ensure you spend the rest of your miserable life in a federal prison. He gestured toward the restaurant doors. Now get out of my sight. Get out of this restaurant. You have nothing but the clothes on your backs. Patricia and Audrey simply did not move, entirely paralyzed by the swift, absolute destruction of their carefully fabricated reality and their massive financial safety nets. William nodded to his 2 highly paid corporate lawyers. The attorney stood up, grabbed the weeping women by their arms, and physically hoisted them to their feet. Patricia stumbled forward, her expensive designer heels slipping on the wine-soaked carpet. Audrey sobbed hysterically into her hands, desperately calling out for a loving husband who was already completely gone. The corporate lawyers ruthlessly marched them toward the restaurant exit, pushing them forcefully through the frosted glass doors and straight out of the luxurious private dining room. The heavy oak doors of Lumiere swung open, and the 2 women were ejected into the cold Chicago night, stripped of their wealth, their status, and their fake kingdom. William stood alone at the head of the table, the ruined king of a shattered empire, breathing heavily in the deafening silence of the private dining room. He watched us leave, paralyzed by the sudden collapse of his entire world, unable to formulate a single coherent sentence to stop us from stepping out the glass door forever. It was the bitter end. I did not stay to comfort him or offer any soothing words. I simply picked up my leather purse, took Ian by the hand, and walked out. We stepped into the crisp Chicago night air, getting into our car and driving back to our safe, quiet suburban home. The war we never wanted to fight was finally over. We had executed the perfect, flawless strategy, and we had definitively won. 6 months later, my daily life looked entirely different. I lay in a comfortable hospital bed, exhausted, but glowing with an overwhelming pure joy. Ian sat right beside me, beaming with pride as he held our 2 healthy newborn babies. Our twins had arrived safely, defying every cruel and malicious prediction my mother and sister had ever made about my body, holding my precious children tightly. I felt the dark shadows of my past completely wash away. I was a mother, a survivor, a successful woman, and the sole architect of my own happiness. The reality for the women who had tormented me was a stark, incredibly brutal contrast. The consequences I had carefully set in motion had detonated with absolute unforgiving precision. Audrey's life had become an unrecognizable nightmare. Jamal kept his promise. He filed for divorce and fought ruthlessly for sole custody of Jamal Jr., with Evelyn Vance's forensic accounting report serving as Exhibit A, demonstrating Audrey's involvement in a multi-million-dollar extortion ring. The judge did not hesitate. Jamal won full custody. Audrey was granted supervised visitation, but she could barely afford the bus fare, cut off from Patricia's stolen funds and crippled by astronomical legal fees. Audrey was forced to take a minimum wage job as a barista to survive. The former golden child who used to sneer at my career while flaunting handbags now spent her days wiping down counters and wearing a polyester uniform, drowning in a sea of debt she would never escape. Patricia suffered a downfall that was spectacular. William delivered on every threat he made. He filed for divorce and handed the extortion dossier directly to the federal authorities. Patricia was stripped of her mansion, her elite country club memberships, and the high society friends she had spent decades cultivating dropped her overnight. No one wanted to be associated with a disgraced socialite facing federal fraud and embezzlement charges. She was forced to rent a dismal apartment, trading her emerald silk gowns for cheap sweatpants. She spent her days meeting with public defenders, staring down the barrel of a federal prison sentence. She had built her entire identity on status and wealth, and she was left with nothing but her own shame. As for William, the destruction of his fake family left him isolated. 3 weeks after the twins were born, a heavy package arrived at my door. It was filled with jewelry, designer baby clothes, and a handwritten letter from my father. He begged for forgiveness. He offered to buy Ian and me an estate. He promised to dedicate the rest of his life and his entire fortune to making up for the past. He wanted to be a grandfather. He wanted a relationship with his only biological daughter. I packed every item back into the box. I drove to his headquarters and left the package with his assistant along with a typed letter of my own. I wrote that I was keeping my 50% share of the trust fund because it was my legal birthright and I would use it to secure my children's future. But I made it clear that his money could not buy my affection. I reminded him that his willful ignorance was just as toxic as Patricia's cruelty. He had watched them abuse me and alienate me for 34 years. And he had done nothing to stop it because he preferred the comfort of his golf games over protecting his child. He was complicit in my suffering. I told him he was no longer my father, just a biological donor who had served his financial purpose. I forbade him from ever contacting my family again. I walked out of his building, stepped into the sunlight, and never looked back. I severed the familial cord completely and permanently. They say that success is the best revenge, but I have learned that genuine peace is even better. I did not just survive my toxic family. I dismantled their illusions with cold, hard data and walked away unscathed. I built a thriving career, a marriage, and a loving home for my children, all without their support. If you are the designated scapegoat of your family, I need you to understand this. Toxic family members will always project their own failures and insecurities onto you. They will try to convince you that you are broken because your strength and resilience remind them of what they lack. Do not let them write your story. Do not accept the role they assign to you. Gather your evidence, secure your independence, and build a life so beautiful that their darkness can never reach you. You hold the power to break the cycle and redefine your future on your terms. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family dynamic or expose a family secret? How did you find the strength to finally cut ties and protect your peace? Please share your stories in the comments below. I read everyone. If my journey resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories of surviving and thriving. Thank you for watching, and remember, your lineage does not dictate your destiny. The story of Clara's ultimate triumph over her family's deception offers a profound and universal lesson. Biology does not demand limitless loyalty, and your self-worth must never be tied to the conditional approval of toxic individuals. For decades, Clara internalized the vicious narrative projected onto her by a mother and sister who viewed her merely as a resource to be exploited. Society often conditions us to believe that family bonds are sacred and unbreakable. Yet, this narrative shatters that illusion, proving that true peace sometimes requires leaving the battlefield altogether. Clara's evolution from a scapegoated daughter to an empowered woman highlights that establishing absolute unyielding boundaries is the ultimate form of self-preservation. When faced with relentless cruelty and financial extortion, she did not react with blind emotion or beg for the love she was consistently denied. Instead, she reclaimed her narrative by relying on cold, undeniable facts to dismantle their empire of lies. She learned that walking away from familiar abuse is not an act of betrayal, but a necessary step for survival. Furthermore, her decision to sever ties completely, even rejecting her father's late guilt-driven attempts at reconciliation, demonstrates that accepting a fragmented, toxic relationship is far worse than standing alone. He was complicit in her suffering, and true boundaries mean holding enablers accountable. 2. Ultimately, Clara broke a generational cycle of manipulation by building a life grounded in authenticity and choosing a family based on mutual respect, rather than obligation. Her greatest triumph was not the financial windfall, but her absolute liberation from her family's toxic shadow. Evaluate the relationships in your own life and have the courage to establish firm boundaries against anyone who requires you to sacrifice your peace and self-worth.